The waterway is blocked. There's nowhere left to go. Choan's voice trembled in the darkness. The end of the tunnel was sealed, and from behind, the light of torches was drawing closer and closer. There was a truly shocking reason why this situation had come to pass. I'm curious, where are you listening to this story right now? How old are you? Where do you live, and what are you doing while listening? I'd be so grateful if you could leave a comment and share your story with me. I truly want to hear from you. Hegang followed the traces Yunpill had left behind and entered the harbor warehouse district. It was a time when the dawn mist hung thick in the air. The warehouses stood close together, and narrow alleyways wound between them like a maze. Yunpill's footprints were scattered here and there, but to Hegang's eyes there was a clear pattern. This man deliberately walked in circles to confuse anyone following. Hegang muttered to himself. There were signs he had been in and out of 3 warehouses, but only one place where he had stayed for any length of time. It was a warehouse in the corner, the most worn and weathered of them all. The door wasn't locked. Hegang quietly stepped inside. The warehouse was more orderly than he'd expected. Sacks of grain were stacked along the walls, and in one corner sat several jars of liquor. But Hegang's gaze was drawn to an old wardrobe standing in the corner. A wardrobe in a grain warehouse, it didn't belong. He opened the wardrobe doors to find clothes hanging inside. Hegang pushed them aside one by one. When he pressed his hand against the back panel and gave it a gentle push, the panel slid to the side. Behind it was a small hidden space, and inside lay 2 ledgers. Hegang pulled out the ledgers and opened them. The first contained a list of ships coming in and out of the harbor. Dates, ship names, types of cargo, quantities. It looked like ordinary record-keeping, but the second ledger was different. It listed the same ships, but the quantities of cargo didn't match the first ledger. The numbers in the second ledger were always larger. Double books, Hegang whispered quietly. Official records and actual transactions kept separately. The difference between them was exactly what had been siphoned off. As Hegang flipped through the pages, he discovered small marks stamped on certain dates. They looked like seals made with red ink, but upon closer inspection, they weren't characters, they were symbols. Could this be the mark of bribes? Hegang traced the symbol with his finger, a wave pattern with 3 dots above it. It seemed familiar somehow, but he couldn't place it. Hegang tucked the ledgers into his coat and stepped out of the warehouse. That's when he heard it, the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. Several riders. Hegang quickly ducked into the shadows behind the warehouse. Soon, 5 mounted men came to a stop in front of the warehouse. They weren't wearing official robes or warriors' garb. They were dressed as ordinary merchants, but the swords at their waists were anything but ordinary. This is the place Yunpill went into, right? The man in front asked. Another nodded. They entered the warehouse. Before long, the sound of things being ransacked came from inside. Then angry cursing erupted. Nothing! The ledgers aren't here! Are we sure this is the right place? Yunpill told us before he died. He said he hid them here. Hegang quietly slipped away. While they were tearing the warehouse apart, Hegang had already disappeared down the alley. At that same moment, Choan was running. Her breath came in gasps, but she couldn't stop. People were chasing her from behind. After parting ways with Hegang, Choan had gone to investigate the Merchant Guild's buildings inside the fortress walls. That's where she'd discovered something strange. Behind one of the guild's main buildings, a grain storage facility people had gathered. They were unloading sacks from carts, but the sacks didn't smell of grain. They smelled of metal. Choan tried to move closer when her foot slipped, and a small stone tumbled down. At the sound, everyone turned their heads at once. Their eyes met Choan's. She turned and began to run. Shouts rang out behind her, followed quickly by the sound of running feet. Choan ran through the alleyways, turning this way and that. But her pursuers seemed to know this area well. Every time she emerged from one alley, someone appeared from another direction. She was being surrounded. Then Choan spotted a small sewer entrance. Without hesitation, she plunged inside. It was dark and narrow. Water rose to her ankles. Choan bent low and pushed forward. Torchlight flickered behind her, but the passage was so narrow only one person could enter at a time. "Stop right there!" A voice called from behind, but Choan didn't stop. The passage grew narrower still, and the ceiling lower. Choan crawled forward on her hands and knees. Then suddenly the space opened up ahead. The passage led into a wider chamber. Choan stood up. As she tried to catch her breath, she heard a strange sound beneath her feet, the sound of water. Looking down, she saw a waterway flowing below, an underground waterway. Choan began following it. The waterway led into a dark tunnel. Behind her, people were still giving chase. Choan continued along the tunnel. It twisted and turned and occasionally split into different paths. Choan chose the path where the most water flowed. She thought the water would lead to an exit. But Hegang was doing something else entirely. After leaving the warehouse, he deliberately left traces of himself scattered about. Broken branches, footprints in the mud, scratch marks on walls. He left them where Choan's pursuers might find them, but in a different direction from Choan's actual trail. Hegang's intention was clear. He was trying to divide the pursuers. If some of those chasing Choan discovered Hegang's traces, they would split up. That would reduce the number of people hunting Choan. Hegang tore a strip from his clothing and hung it on a branch near the eastern wall of the fortress. Then he turned in the opposite direction and headed toward the harbor. He had to find Choan. But Choan's situation was growing worse. After following the tunnel for some time, she suddenly found her way blocked. The waterway continued, but the path she'd been walking on came to an end. Iron bars blocked the waterway, and beyond them she could see only a tunnel completely submerged in water. Choan looked back. The torchlight was drawing closer. There were several of them. She tried shaking the iron bars, but they wouldn't budge. She considered going into the water, but she had no way of knowing how long the tunnel was, or whether she could hold her breath long enough to make it through. The waterway is blocked. There's nowhere left to go, Choan whispered. Her hands trembled. Behind her, the footsteps stopped. Men carrying torches appeared at the tunnel entrance. 5 of them. They walked slowly toward Choan. Nowhere left to run now, the man in front said. He drew his sword. The others pulled out their weapons as well. Choan pressed her back against the wall. In her hand was only a small dagger. What did you see? The man asked. Choan didn't answer. The man took another step closer. Tell us, and we'll make it quick. If you don't... Before the man could finish, a scream suddenly rang out from behind them. The men all spun around at once. A shadow moved near the tunnel entrance. One torch fell to the ground and went out. Who's there? The man shouted. But there was no answer. Instead, another scream echoed, and another torch fell into the water. The men were thrown into confusion. Should they capture Choan ahead of them or deal with the attacker behind? Choan didn't waste the opportunity. She quickly squeezed herself into a small crevice in the wall. It was tight, but her small frame could just barely fit. As the torchlight flickered wildly, Choan disappeared into the darkness. The men were now facing the attacker from behind, but in the darkness they couldn't see exactly who was there. They swung their swords but cut only empty air. Then suddenly, all the torches went out at once. Complete darkness engulfed the tunnel. Screams, the clash of swords, the splash of water. In the chaos, all sounds merged together. And then, after a moment, the tunnel fell silent. Only someone's heavy breathing echoed in the darkness. Choan held her breath in the crevice. She had no idea what had happened outside. Who had won? Who was out there now? She didn't move a muscle. After a long silence, a small light flickered to life again. Someone was holding a new torch. In its light, the silhouette of a single figure was revealed. Choan held her breath. The figure slowly turned its head. When Taigu's voice echoed through the darkness, I knew instinctively that Chun had already fallen into his hands. Chun, Seoryong's closest aide, and the only one possessing the eyes of heaven capable of opening the Imperial secret vault. Taigu intended to use those eyes to seize all the treasures and symbols of power within the palace. There was a deeply shocking reason why this situation had come to pass. For those of you listening to this story right now, I'm genuinely curious, where are you from? How old are you? And what are you doing while listening? Are you commuting, or perhaps relaxing at home? Please share in the comments. Chun disappeared 3 nights before the seal ceremony. That evening, Seoryong had been in meetings with the protocol department until late, while I was organizing the event schedule in a small study at the end of the corridor. Chun had clearly said he was returning to his quarters at that hour. But the next morning, his room was empty with only a brief note left on his bed. Do not worry. I will return soon. The handwriting was his, yet something felt wrong. Chun never used vague terms like soon, he always specified exact times. The moment Seoryong saw that note, his face hardened. Seoryong's voice was low and cold. When Yunpill arrived, Seoryong didn't even show him the note. He simply asked quietly, "Where is the seal box?" I personally verified and sealed it myself. It's stored deep in the archives. Yunpill's answer was perfect, but I sensed something off in his eyes. He was too calm. Despite Chun's disappearance, he showed no sign of alarm whatsoever. Then the seal ceremony proceeds as planned. However, we'll make it a public event. At those words, Yunpill's face stiffened slightly. A public event meant holding it not inside the palace, but in the plaza before the Great Hall where all the people could witness it. The seal ceremony had always been a closed ritual attended only by select officials. Seoryong was turning it completely upside down. "Your Majesty, that's far too dangerous. We'd need to redeploy security and more importantly... More importantly? Seoryong cut him off. Yunpill hesitated, then fell silent. Seoryong looked out the window as he spoke. "Do you think Taigu will make his move?" It's possible. Then all the more reason to make it public. Those who wield blades in darkness are weak before the light. Seoryong's strategy was clear. He was drawing Taigu out. With Chun kidnapped, if Taigu heard the seal ceremony was becoming a public event, he would have no choice but to act. He had to prevent Seoryong from officially receiving the Emperor's seal, which meant he'd have to make his move during the ceremony itself. But I felt uneasy. It seemed Seoryong was taking too dangerous a gamble. Taigu already had Chun, which meant he essentially possessed the key to the Imperial secret vault. If he managed to retrieve weapons or other symbols of power from within, the situation could spiral completely out of control. The night before the ceremony, I visited Seoryong's quarters. He sat alone, a map spread before him, sketching something. It was a layout of the plaza before the Great Hall. "Here there's a waterway." Seoryong pointed to a spot on the map. Beneath the plaza ran an old waterway system. Originally built for rainwater drainage, it was now rarely used. "I'll position half the Imperial Guard here. No matter where Taigu appears, we can surround him through this waterway." Seoryong's plan was meticulous. He would station only regular guards above ground, while hiding the true elite forces inside the waterways. The moment Taigu caused chaos, the waterway covers would open simultaneously, and the Imperial Guard would emerge like a net closing in. "But what about Chun if Taigu has him?" "I will find Chun myself." Seoryong's voice was resolute. He rolled up the map and added, "Taigu needs Chun's eyes, which means Chun is alive, and there's only one place he'll take Chun." "Where?" "Where the secret vault is located. During the ceremony, amid the chaos, he'll head there. I'll be waiting for that moment." Looking into Seoryong's eyes, I understood. He had already calculated everything: Taigu's psychology, his objectives, the timing of his move. Yet simultaneously, I felt another wave of anxiety. What if Seoryong's calculations were wrong? What if Taigu made an unexpected move? That night, I couldn't sleep. Walking the corridors, I happened upon Yunpill. He was coming from the direction of the archives. "The archives at this late hour?" I asked casually. "What brings you here at this time?" "Final inspection of the seal box. Tomorrow is an important day after all." Yunpill smiled gently, but his hands trembled slightly. In that moment, I was certain. Yunpill had done something. At dawn, I reported this to Seoryong. He listened quietly, then nodded. "I'll check the seal box, but not now. Just before the ceremony." "Why? If we check now, Yunpill mustn't suspect. If he's connected to Taigu, our plan could be exposed." Seoryong remained calm. Too calm it was almost frightening. He was willing to accept every risk to make this single opportunity perfect. On the morning of the seal ceremony, the plaza filled with people. Citizens gathered to witness their new emperor's enthronement, while officials lined up in formal attire on either side of the Great Hall steps. I stood behind Seoryong, surveying the surroundings. The Imperial Guard was nowhere to be seen, all hidden within the waterways. Just before the ceremony began, Yunpill appeared carrying the seal box. It was an ornately decorated wooden case. He placed it carefully on the table before the great hall. Seoryong paused, looking at the box. Then he spoke to Yunpill. "Open it." Yunpill's face went rigid. "Your Majesty should open it yourself." I said, "Open it now." Seoryong's voice was cold and firm. Yunpill reluctantly opened the lid. Inside lay a golden seal, but Seoryong didn't remove it. Instead, he ran his finger along the inside corners of the box, then brought his finger close to his nose. Incense powder. At Seoryong's words, the plaza fell silent. People murmured in confusion. Officials exchanged bewildered glances. Yunpill's face went pale as he shook his head. "Your Majesty, Toxic incense powder. Inhaling this causes gradual loss of consciousness. While signing with the seal, I would have collapsed, and people would have thought me unworthy of being emperor," Seoryong explained calmly. His voice carried across the entire plaza. The people were shocked, gasps rising from among the officials. Yunpill staggered backward and collapsed to the ground. At that very moment, screams erupted from the back of the plaza. People suddenly scattered to both sides, and through the gap, Taigu appeared. Beside him was Chun, blindfolded and being dragged along. "Seoryong," Taigu's voice filled the plaza. He held a blade to Chun's throat as he walked slowly forward. "No matter how carefully you plan, it's useless. With this boy's eyes, I can open all the Imperial secrets. I don't need your seal." Taigu was laughing, but Seoryong showed no surprise. Instead, he took a step toward Taigu. "So that's why you came? To take Chun to the secret vault?" "Exactly." "But you can't stop me. My men have already secured the perimeter." The moment Taigu finished speaking, figures in black emerged throughout the plaza. They surrounded Seoryong in an instant, threatening the citizens. The situation spiraled toward catastrophe. But at that very moment, Seoryong raised his hand and shouted a single word. "Now!" At his signal, Waterway covers throughout the plaza opened simultaneously. Imperial guards burst forth from within. Like a massive net unfurling, they surrounded Taigu and his followers in seconds. Taigu's face twisted. Caught off guard, he gripped Chun tighter. But Seoryong didn't stop. He approached Taigu slowly, very slowly. "Release Chun. You've already lost." "Silence! One more step and I'll cut this boy's throat!" Taigu shouted. But Seoryong didn't stop. His gaze remained unwavering, fixed on Taigu. And in that moment, I understood. Seoryong had been waiting for this moment all along for Taigu to appear with Choan. The plaza fell deathly quiet. The Imperial Guard stood with drawn swords, completely surrounding Taigu, while citizens held their breath watching this standoff. Yunpill remained on the ground, head bowed. Seoryong stopped just 3 steps from Taigu, then spoke quietly but clearly. "The moment you harm Chun, you die as well. But if you release him, you may live. Choose." Taigu's hands began to tremble. His blade wavered slightly at Chun's throat. Chun remained blindfolded and silent, but I saw his lips move ever so slightly, as if whispering something. And in that instant, Chun suddenly ducked. He slipped free from Taigu's grip. Simultaneously, one of the Imperial Guard rushed forward like lightning and struck Taigu's blade away. Taigu lost his balance and stumbled, and within seconds, several guards subdued him. It was all over in mere moments. Taigu lay on the ground, captured by the Imperial Guard, and his followers all surrendered. Seoryong approached Chun and removed his blindfold. The moment Chun opened his eyes and saw Seoryong, he bowed his head slightly. "Forgive me, Your Majesty." "No, you did well." Seoryong placed a hand on Chun's shoulder, then turned back to face the plaza. The people still stood in shock, watching this scene unfold. Seoryong spoke to them slowly. "Today you have witnessed how those who lust for power fall. Before accepting this seal, I first removed the poison from this land. Now the true beginning starts." His voice resonated powerfully. The plaza fell silent briefly, then erupted in cheers. People began chanting Seoryong's name, and officials knelt in reverence. I understood then. Seoryong hadn't merely subdued Taigu, he had shown the people the strength of their new emperor. The reason for making it a public event, for risking such danger, it was all for this moment. The seal ceremony proceeded quietly afterward. Seoryong opened the purified seal box and officially received the emperor's seal. In that moment, everyone in the plaza knelt. I knelt alongside them, thinking now the real beginning starts. But I knew this wasn't the end. Taigu was captured, but Yunpill hadn't fully confessed, and who else might be behind this remained unclear. Seoryong's battle had only just begun. That night, Seoryong summoned me. He stood gazing out the window, speaking quietly. Now we must interrogate Yunpill. We need to know exactly who he conspired with. Do you think there's a larger force involved? Certainly. Yunpill isn't someone who would orchestrate this alone. Someone manipulated him, and that someone still hides in the shadows. Seoryong's words carried weight. I knew in that moment what he meant. We had only caught the visible enemy, the true threat had yet to reveal itself. And that premonition would soon become reality. After my conversation with Seoryong that night, I learned one more thing. He had already finished preparing to interrogate Yunpill. But before that, there was something that absolutely had to be done. Rescuing Chun completely and safely. Immediately after the seal ceremony ended, Seoryong summoned Hegang. Hegang was the most agile and prudent member of the Imperial Guard. Seoryong gave him a brief instruction. Find where Taigu hid Chun. It's probably somewhere in the tunnels beneath the plaza. Hegang nodded and moved immediately. That's when I realized Seoryong had known all along where Chun was. For Taigu to reach the secret vault during the chaos of the ceremony, he would have needed to hide Chun somewhere nearby. And that somewhere nearby could only be the old tunnel network beneath the plaza. About an hour after Hegang departed, the plaza still buzzed with celebration. The people sang and danced, rejoicing in their new emperor's enthronement. But Seoryong sat facing Yunpill in a small room within the great hall. I was there as well. Yunpill still stared at the floor, his face pale. Seoryong sat across from him and asked quietly, "Who ordered you to do this?" Yunpill didn't answer. Seoryong sighed and continued. "You were once a loyal servant. The late emperor trusted you, as did I. But at some point I realized you had changed. Did someone threaten you or persuade you?" Yunpill's lips trembled slightly. He still didn't raise his head, but a voice escaped him. "My family." At those words, Seoryong's eyes sharpened. I tensed as well. I knew Yunpill had a family, but I hadn't imagined they'd been taken hostage. "What happened to your family?" "They were sent to the northern frontier. If I didn't follow orders, they said they would harm them." Yunpill's voice shook. Seoryong fell silent for a moment, then asked, "Who gave such orders?" But Yunpill closed his mouth again. At that moment, urgent footsteps sounded from outside. The door opened and Hegang entered. Behind him followed Chun, the blindfold removed from his eyes. "Your Majesty, I found him." At Hegang's report, Seoryong immediately rose. Chun entered the room with slightly unsteady steps. I rushed to support him. "Are you all right?" Chun nodded slowly, but his eyes looked different than usual. They held something firm and resolute. He looked around the room and spotted Yunpill, then walked slowly toward him. "Minister Yunpill." Chun's voice was low and calm. Yunpill raised his head to look at Chun. Chun met his eyes directly and spoke. "When Taigu dragged me away, I saw it with my own eyes. On his hands, on his clothes, blackness spreading everywhere." "Blackness?" Seoryong asked. Chun nodded. "My eyes are different from ordinary ones. When I see toxic substances or contaminated things, they appear black to me." Taigu's hands and clothes bore that blackness heavily, as if he had handled the substance for a long time. Chun paused and slowly approached Yunpill, then looked at his hands. "Your hands carry the same scent, Minister. The scent of incense powder." At those words, Yunpill's face grew even paler. Chun didn't back down. He continued. "Taigu told me. If this succeeded, he would release your family. But if it failed, you would die along with them. In that moment, Yunpill crumbled. He sank to the floor, head bowed. Seoryong looked down at him quietly and asked, "Tell me now, who stands behind Taigu?" Yunpill hesitated for a long while, then answered in a trembling voice, "The Northern. 3 Tribes Alliance. They wanted the Imperial court weakened and used Taigu to destabilize it from within." Silence filled the room. The Northern 3 Tribes Alliance. They had maintained a tense relationship with the Imperial court for years. But I never imagined they would dare reach into the palace itself. Seoryong nodded slowly. "I understand. I will personally rescue your family, but you must answer for everything you've done." Yunpill remained silent, head still bowed. Seoryong instructed Hegang, "Take Yunpill to the dungeon and secretly send people north to find his family." After Hegang led Yunpill away, Seoryong turned to Chun. "Chun, without you, today's events wouldn't have ended so cleanly." "No, Your Majesty. I simply spoke what I saw." At Chun's humble response, Seoryong smiled. But that smile soon turned serious. "Chun, I need to tell you something about your parents." At those words, Chun's face stiffened. I tensed as well. Chun's parents had disappeared suddenly over a decade ago. Official records stated they were executed for treason, but no one knew the details. Seoryong spoke slowly. "Before my enthronement, while organizing the late Emperor's secret documents, I discovered something. Your parents weren't traitors. Quite the opposite, in fact." "What do you mean?" Chun's voice trembled. Seoryong explained quietly. "Your parents were officials managing Imperial finances. They discovered the finance minister at the time was embezzling Imperial funds. They tried to report this to the late Emperor. But that minister moved first?" "Exactly. He framed your parents as traitors and had them eliminated, then destroyed all evidence." Chun stood frozen. Tears streamed down his face. I placed a hand on his shoulder, but he raised his head to look at Seoryong. "That minister, where is he now?" "Already dead. He passed away from illness 5 years ago. But your parents' honor must be restored." Seoryong spoke firmly. Days later, he officially declared the reopening of the investigation into Chun's parents' case. Imperial records were re-examined, everyone involved was summoned. A month later, the truth emerged. Chun's parents were innocent. In fact, they had been loyal servants who sacrificed themselves trying to expose corruption. Seoryong publicly announced this before the Great Hall, fully restoring Chun's parents' honor. From this day forward, Chun's parents, Chomyong and Seoyun, shall be recorded as loyal servants of the Imperial court. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten, and their son Chun will carry on their legacy in service to this nation. At Seoryong's proclamation, the people in the plaza cheered. Chun knelt, tears flowing. Standing beside him, I felt my heart swell with emotion. Days later, Seoryong summoned Chun again, this time to an old building on the eastern side of the palace. It had once stored Imperial documents, but had been abandoned for years. "What is this place?" When I asked, Seoryong smiled and answered, "The Archives Academy, or rather what it will become." "Archives Academy?" Chun tilted his head in puzzlement. Seoryong pointed to the building and explained, "We'll transform this place. It will store all Imperial records while teaching young people how to read and analyze them." "Chun, I want you to be the first student." Chun looked at Seoryong with surprise. "Someone like me, you possess eyes that read truth. Those eyes save lives before any sword can. Recent events proved that." At Seoryong's words, Chun hesitated briefly, then slowly bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will honor my parents' legacy and give my best." From that day forward, the Archives Academy was rapidly prepared. Seoryong ordered all Imperial documents moved there and selected bright young people from across the nation as students. Chun became the most outstanding among them. Meanwhile, Yunpill's family was safely rescued. A small unit led by Hegang ventured to the northern frontier and found them. Yunpill, hearing this news in his cell, reportedly shed tears for the first time. He still had to face punishment for his crimes, but at least his family was safe. Seoryong didn't execute Yunpill. Instead, he sent him to the frontier to atone. There, Yunpill would spend his remaining days serving the people. Taigu and his followers were all arrested and tried. Their crimes were clear attempted assassination of the emperor, treason, kidnapping, each a capital offense. The trial was held publicly, with citizens watching the proceedings. Taigu resisted to the end. He shouted in the courtroom, "I've done nothing wrong. This nation was corrupt and needed a new ruler." But the judge delivered the verdict coldly. The defendant Taigu is sentenced to death for treason. Execution in 3 days. Taigu continued shouting as he was dragged away, but no one listened. He had endangered countless lives for his ambition and had to pay the price. 3 days later, Taigu's execution was carried out. I didn't witness it directly, but Seoryong watched until the end. He told me later, "Witnessing a person's death is never easy, but a ruler must bear that weight. I must see the end of my own decisions." Seoryong's words were heavy, yet I could feel his sense of responsibility. I occasionally visited the Archives Academy. There I could see Chun teaching other students how to read records. His eyes no longer held sadness. Instead, they shone with hope. Records aren't simply writings of the past. Truth hides within them. We must uncover that truth so the future doesn't repeat the same mistakes. Listening to Chun's words, I thought the nation Seoryong was building wasn't merely a strong nation, but one where truth was honored. After everything was settled, Seoryong began rebuilding relations with the Northern Three Tribes Alliance. Rather than subduing them by force, he attempted dialogue. He sent envoys to explain what had transpired and proposed maintaining peaceful relations going forward. The response was lukewarm at first, but over time the northern tribes gradually opened their hearts. They too preferred peaceful trade to endless warfare. 6 months passed. The palace regained stability and the people's lives gradually improved. Seoryong rose early each morning to handle state affairs and visited the Archives Academy each evening to talk with students. Days later, Seoryong made an important announcement at the Great Hall. He declared all Imperial financial records would be made transparent and accessible to the people at any time. He also promised to establish archives academies throughout the nation, giving everyone opportunities to learn. Truth must not be hidden. It must be placed in the light where all can see it. Only then can we avoid repeating the same mistakes. Officials were surprised by Seoryong's declaration, but the people cheered. This was unprecedented. No emperor in history had ever opened Imperial records like this. But Seoryong remained unwavering. He walked the path he believed was right. That night I visited Seoryong's quarters again. He stood by the window, gazing at the night sky. "Your Majesty." He turned at my call. "This is only the beginning." I nodded at Seoryong's words. Yes, this was merely the beginning. Stopping Taigu and Yunpill's treason was just the first step. Mountains of work still lay ahead, but I was no longer afraid. Seoryong stood beside me, and people like Chun were with us. Together we could make this nation a better place. Eyes that read truth save lives before any sword can. Seoryong's words to Choan kept echoing in my mind. Those words didn't apply only to Chun. They applied to all of us. The courage to see truth, the strength to practice justice, and the will to never give up. With these, we could overcome any darkness, and that faith would continue. Under Seoryong's rule, this nation was changing slowly but surely. I looked out the window. Even in darkness, the stars shone brightly. Like that starlight, I believed our efforts would someday illuminate this land. And until that belief became reality, I would remain at Seoryong's side, until the very end.